welcome to this episode of ArtsAbly in Conversation. My name is Diane Collin. I am a woman with short hair, blue eyes and glasses, and today I wear a black and white striped top. Behind me is a dance studio with gray walls, tall mirrors, and spotlights. This series presents artists, academics, and project leaders who dedicate their time and energy to a better accessibility for people with disabilities in the arts. You can find more of these conversations on our website, artsably.com, which is spelled ArtsAbly.com. Today, ArtsAbly is in conversation with Mercedes Lysaker, a cellist, a teacher, and a scholar based in New York. You can find the resources mentioned by Mercedes Lysaker during this episode on ArtsAbly's website in the blog section. Welcome to this new episode of ArtsAbly in Conversation. Today, we are with Mercedes Lysaker, who is a cellist, a teacher, and a scholar based in New York City. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Diane.
Thank you. I know that we went back and forth a little bit. I know that you are also part of the RAMPed community, which is dear to me too. And I've been following your multiple activities. I know you have several interesting projects on the go, and I'm looking forward to talking about all that.
Great. I'm excited too.
Okay, so I always start these episodes by asking about our guests. So about your background, can you tell a little bit more about you? When did music start for you? And also, if you could provide a visual description, thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm Mercedes. I'm a white lady. I have reddish brown hair. I'm wearing headphones and big tinted glasses. Um, I mean, I don't remember when music started for me, but I was definitely the kid that was bouncing around the living room while my parents played music and sort of let me run down all the energy because it was so overwhelming. It was such an enormous sensory experience for me as a kid. But I've been a cellist for a long time. I don't want to say how long because that will age me. Um, but I got classical music education, standard stuff. I was an orchestral musician for a while. Um, and then there was the pandemic. So since then, my work has sort of expanded from where I started. I was very much on the orchestral track, on the teaching track. I got a degree in music education. I wrote my master's thesis on the relationships that people have with their instruments and how people have these kind of interpersonal relationships. People name their instruments. They have, very social relationships with their instruments. Um, and then my scholarly interests kind of turned towards progressive pedagogy. Big string pedagogy nerd, really, really like how the instruments work. I enjoy figuring out how to teach them effectively and efficiently. Um, and sort of since, New York City shut down for a while. And I kind of took that as an opportunity to pivot towards um, a little bit more social music making in a sense because I wasn't going out anymore. I wasn't doing things um, in person, but I was more interested in, making music that was about social things. I was more interested in, I started doing spiritual music, Jewish spiritual music. I'm Jewish, kind of social issue based compositions. And I was kind of on this big plan that I had through the pandemic. I really knew where I was going with all this, and then I got cancer. And getting cancer during the pandemic was a wild experience. I don't recommend it. But one thing it did was force me to slow down a little bit. And so I spent sort of my surgery time, my recovery time, my treatment time playing a lot of video games. I mean, I think that's probably pretty expected. Um, and that's when I got this kind of crazy idea that maybe video game music would be a cool thing to do. Um, and because I had been so caught off guard by this medical event, I think as many disabled people understand how disruptive that can be if it happens suddenly. Um, for the past couple years, I have been putting a lot into a little video game music channel where I take video game music and arrange it for live cello, of course, um, in a wide variety of genres. I do a lot of genre mixing. I do a lot of kind of hybrid forms with orchestral sounds and then electronic music, kind of all mixed together. So, strangely, this kind of diversion from where I thought I was going with my career has really brought up some exciting stuff. And I've been very, I mean, I'm very grateful that sort of I had this experience because now I'm so active in this field. So all of my projects recently have been in the video game music world, which is a great world to be in. Very progressive, very nice people, um, and it's been a real joy.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so, where did you study? What was your university where you got your master?
I went to Indiana University. I was in the pre-college program there, did my undergrad there, my master's degree there. And then I moved to New York and I went to Teachers College for my second degree because, gotta go, gotta keep learning. I love learning. And that's how I ended up in the city for the pandemic. And I always like to joke that this was an awful idea because I decided to go to music school during the Great Recession. And then within 10 years after I graduated, global pandemic, shut everything down. Like I don't think I could have had worse timing. And that's not including the cancer, right? And the car crashes, but it was just, whoo, I don't know how anyone let me do that. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I love you guys.
The cancer and the car crash.
So that's when I guess that's part of my story. That's when I acquired my disability. I was in my second full year as an orchestral musician, and I was in Southern Indiana, so it was all driving. And hit a deer. The carpool I was in hit a deer, totaled the car. Um, and I just felt real weird for a couple days. Went to the doctor and they said, "Oh, probably a head injury. You might want to do something about that." Um, and just never came, I never recovered. Just never came back to where I was before. But you know what? Ironically, I think being a musician was very helpful because I did not rely on a 9 to 5 office job, which I cannot do. That was never something that I needed to do. I never had to be in a room with fluorescent lights surrounded by people talking to me. So kind of ironic that I was already kind of in an accessible field, although we can come back to that later about how accessible the field really is.
Yeah. And so you studied classical performance with an acoustic cello,
Correct.
and at a certain point you switched to an electronic cello, right? Or electric cello.
So the real reason that I went to music school, and I will always I have a professional answer for like job interviews, but for stuff like this, I can be honest. I was really, really into Apocalyptica, um, uh, a heavy metal band that's all on cello. Discovered that in middle school, and middle school is when you have those like heavy metal feelings that you have to deal with, right? That's sort of when those start. Obsessed, just absolutely obsessed. Whole discography, knew all these songs back and forth, and I would just play them on my cello. I would put on my headphones and turn up the music really loud and try to figure out the parts. And um, so then I went to music school, and we didn't play very much Metallica in the conservatory. But then when I graduated, I just had this crazy idea that I was on route to go to a friend's um, new place in South Carolina, and we drove through North Carolina where the electric violin shop is, and I was like, well, I never played an electric cello. It sounds kind of cool. I might go check it out. And oh boy, was that a bad idea. Um, because I could not get that out of my head. It was just the most electrifying experience possibly of my life. Um, because I could be loud, because I could really wail on this instrument and love my acoustic cello is my the love of my life. Her name is Amelie, a good French name, and my cello is in the background. Her name is Rosie. Um, but I suddenly could tap into that initial feeling that got me obsessed with the cello. I could be loud. I could cry in a way that was what was harder for me to do on the acoustic cello. Um, and one nice thing about the electric cello, obviously, you can add effects to it. You can make it sound like a guitar. You can make it sound anything you want. It is also very quiet because it doesn't have a resonator, and I live in a New York City apartment building. So, hey, I am practicing recording at 3 a.m. and nobody cares.
Perfect.
Little bonus there.
Yeah. So from that, is that when did you start considering, oh, I should create my own identity as a fusion metal rock player or something like that? When did you start considering, because I know you have a name where you perform that genre, right?
Yeah, so I started that kind of path mentally and emotionally. It took a little bit for things to crystallize. Um, in 2016, when there was a presidential election that was very difficult, um, and I realized um, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a policy person. I don't work in politics. I didn't feel like there's anything I could do. All these things were happening that are happening again.
Yeah,
Hey.
sorry.
Um, hey, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. Um, but I realized I felt like there was something that was just missing, that I was just seeing all these things happening and I couldn't do anything about it. And it took a little bit before at least I can make music. And I can make music that's angry. And I can make music that's sad. And I can make music that, at the very, very least, marks something in this time. I think my first, I adopted the name Contraforma in 2020, 2021, somewhere in there. Um, and that came to me when I was writing. I was writing a journal article, and I was trying to come up with an antonym for conform, um, because I had this sort of image, this sensory feeling of, if you have a thing of Play-Doh, right, or silly putty, and you squish it with your hands and make it into a shape, the Play-Doh conforms to the shape. But what would happen if the Play-Doh refused and expanded instead of you pushing it and expanded out? And I came up with contraform instead of conform, contraform. And then I threw an A on the end because I'm a lady, you know.
Mm.
And that sort of feeling of pushing back, feeling all this pressure to be smaller, to be quieter or more palatable, whatever it is. Um, and just saying, nah, no, I'm good, and actively pushing that out. And my first single was about the Texas abortion ban that I think hit in 2021 or 2022. It's called Aid and Abet. Um, and that's kind of where that came from. I just felt I gotta do something, and I have all these people around me who are smart, and I'm just like, I play the cello, you know. Um, but having that really gave me an opportunity to at least try. Gotta try.
Yeah, but speaking of smart, I mean, it was very smart to use this contraforma that you're mentioning, and that is now the name of your identity as a fusion cellist, and to play Johann Sebastian Bach and Vivaldi in fusion and in rock and in metal.
It's so natural. I think this is, I think that everyone who kind of hears, especially for Baroque music in a certain way, you only have to hear it a certain way once, and you can't unhear how much in common it really has with the sound profile, the atmosphere of heavy metal. And when I put those effects on, and was playing, the Vivaldi came from a teacher training that I had to do. I had to perform the piece, I had to memorize it, and I was practicing and I was like really bored. And then I thought, let's put some effects on this. And that's how that came out. I was just like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. It worked so, so well. It was very cool.
What about pocket cello?
Oh boy. The only way that I got through cancer, I mean, besides my family, I love you. Thank you, family. Played a lot of video games, and it was such a way for me to be engrossed in something that was not the disruption to my life, because I had couldn't work. It was the pandemic. If I got COVID, I would have to not get surgery, not get treatment, and I just had to be isolated. Um, and I realized how many people rely on something trivial like video games, um, as a support mechanism. And I was sitting there just, how am I going to get back to this? How am I going to move forward? And I thought, well, what if I just go play one of these themes on the cello? Um, and that was kind of fun. And I realized that, you know, one thing that I could do to at least express my appreciation for, um, the way these video games helped me in this hard time was to celebrate their music. Um, and it's kind of started out as a little side project, something I would do when I was procrastinating on my other projects. Um, and I realized how much I loved arranging and orchestrating. And so I would take these themes that, um, were not written for cello. They were many of them were not written for human played instruments at all. They were written for sound chips. For the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance had their own chips. Never meant to be played by a human being when they were composed. So it was a really, really neat experience and kind of a almost an academic exercise to take um, these themes, try to extract some kind of melodic component, um, and then build up from again sometimes a very thin original material, a whole foundation of keyboards, of strings, of brass, of synths. Um, and I started out doing really, really simple things. And my most recent project was a complete reimagining, a complete reorchestration um, of a new theme from this video game franchise. And I did not expect, starting a YouTube channel, you gotta stick with it if you want to see any gains from it, right? Um, and I was really surprised that because I had found this niche completely by happenstance, by circumstance, um, I was able to build a little name for myself, and my channel is doing kind of well. It's very tiny, it's microscopic, but there are people who listen to my music. There are people who listen to my music when they're having a hard time. And because I started this from my own hard time, that's been very rewarding, I think.
And you're also a teacher,
Yes,
right?
I am also a teacher and a writer. My teaching has slowed down a little bit because, again, of the whole global pandemic. But writing was also one of those things that um, I was really able to focus on when things shut down because it's just me and my brain, which works sometimes. Not a guarantee, but sometimes it does work.
And what about these publications? I know you published a lot. You did also some conference presentations about your work, and so I'm interested in the topics that you're treating in these publications.
My big focus has been progressive string pedagogy. Progressive education and music education have somewhat of a history. It's not as significant as other types of education. But what I noticed was that the really foundational philosophies of progressive education had not made their way into how to teach people to play the violin because the classical music education industrial complex, is impermeable. It's very, very difficult to get anything to change. And I realized that, in music education, you basically had two things. You could go the classical route where maybe you would get a great teacher, maybe you get an abusive one. That was very, very common where I went to school. Or you could go to someone who was progressive but who wouldn't give you anything of rigor. They would just sort of, oh, you're doing great. That's a great job. Um, and it was very difficult for me to kind of move these things closer to each other so that you could have um, the intensity, I think, of classical training where you really you have laser focus on the smallest of the finest of fine motor skills. You're really thinking about body mechanics, you're thinking about how to achieve very minute movements that can blossom into this whole repertoire of technique. And I was very excited by the possibility that we could still have this great tradition of um, very rigorous, very intense classical training, where we could train people to play these instruments to a really high level, while also perhaps shedding some of the conservative elements of conservatory. So I was very interested in changing repertoire. I was very interested in changing the kind of Suzuki because I am a Suzuki certified teacher. I did a lot of Suzuki training. And I really, really liked the scaffolding, liked the sequencing. I did not like that you had to play Vivaldi. And I was when I was teaching in the city before the pandemic, I met so many students who loved the craft almost. They were very, very interested in figuring it out. They saw the cello as a puzzle. They saw it as something that they could really explore. They did not want to play Suzuki Book One. They wanted to play the Wii Shop menu. And they would come up with they would say, "Can we play Chicken Nugget Dreamland?" And I was like, "What's Chicken Nugget Dreamland?" And they would play it for me. I'm like, "Okay, let's play that." That is not in the Suzuki books, by the way. It is a bop. It is a banger. You should check it out. So what I could do was I could take these really, really important principles for approaching the instrument, for getting a good foundation, um, build those smoothly, and then ideally, my students would leave with enough ability to play what they wanted and to play when they wanted and how they wanted. And if they wanted to be a professional, that's great. If they wanted to play at a family party, fantastic. If they wanted to do exactly what I did, put on their favorite music with their headphones and play along to get through the horrors of adolescence, that's worth it. That's important. And I think that's sort of the excitement that I got from maybe finding that little missing piece of education. So my scholarship has been mostly about how to approach building curriculum. A lot of the things that you see in progressive education and progressive music education is very abstract, and that's not good. We have teachers who are so overworked and underpaid that they have to use the materials we give them, so we got to give them better materials. What kind of materials can we build? Um, and I wanted to just add a little bit to the kind of library that we pull from when we teach so that we could have maybe just a slightly wider pool of instrumentalists in the next generations.
Did you do professional developments for teachers or people who wanted to go further in that?
Yeah, I've done a couple workshops. Um, I've done talks at universities and education departments. One of my more recent ones was adapting a framework from literacy, from reading education actually, to music. And the framework was kind of how literature shows us um, windows into other people's lives. And it can also show us mirrors and show us our own life reflected back in them. Makes a lot of sense in literature. And I thought, well, what is what does that look like in music? What would a musical mirror look like? What would a musical window look like? And I went through some of our more common string education materials. And I said, hey, who has mirrors here? Who has mirrors? Who has windows? What does that mean? What does that change for the learning experience of that student when maybe those things are not balanced?
For sure. So did you have an answer?
Oh boy, do I, well, as an academic, you never have any answers. You got to write more papers. And yeah.
I know. Well, there is something I read in your biography, and that I have to ask the question. I read that you're working with some national trade organizations advocating for disability rights and string education. What are these national trade education organizations?
Well, one of them is called Ramped. Of course, the dear organization recording artists and music professionals with disabilities. Um, One thing that I did notice as a scholar, well, scholar sounds a little, um, not a very accessible field. Not a lot of people who were interested in non-superficial accessibility. So I feel like there's a lot of things where we have a ramp. We have a wheelchair user in our promotional materials. We have a performer with a limb difference. check, we did it. Um, and I just happened to see on Twitter many, many years ago, it feels like now, that there was maybe this new organization. Um, and that did really crystallize a couple things for me because I realized that this kind of feeling I had about the inaccessibility of, I mean, not just performing, but also teaching and also, being something of an academic, trying to talk to people, trying to share ideas. Um, there was a gap there. There weren't a lot of people in those rooms who were thinking about the things that Ramped is just loud about. I mean, disability culture, blank looks, very, very little interest in, um, adjusting how we do things because of the pandemic, being at somewhat of a higher risk for COVID complications. Um, suddenly everyone was fine with me no longer being there. Um, and I like to stay at home and do nothing. So sometimes I was also happy with not being there. But you know, the the feeling that suddenly I didn't really know how to advocate for myself. I knew kind of intellectually that something was wrong, but I also knew that there were probably dozens, hundreds of other people like me who are being pushed out, who were feeling that they did not have um, anyone who would listen to them. They didn't feel, um, maybe they didn't have an opportunity to voice things. And so finding Ramped kind of helped crystallize some of um, the principles of advocacy and activism and being loud. I think that's sort of my the thing that really draws me to Ramped is that it is not polite all the time. I mean, maybe that's not a nice thing to say, but it's not um we're very interested in getting equity, getting access. And we're not gonna sort of be pretty please about, there's an insistence that I think is necessary, especially in these times. Um, and a kind of defiant celebration that we're here, we know what we're doing, we're professionals, and it's time to let us in.
Yeah, and we're promoting disability culture, which is very important, and trying to show that accessibility in the arts is important. Well, in these times, someone is just saying that EDI is not important and removing important pages from important websites. I wouldn't name this person, but really it makes it even more important for us to talk about that. So I want to, can you give us a meaning or a definition of what it is for you, disability culture?
I So recently I had a really great experience with Lachi. I worked on some music videos with her, and this was my first COVID safe production that I had really done where I was not usually I am the person wearing a mask and like avoiding things, right? Um, but this was the first event production that I'd been to where everyone was wearing a mask because I was there. I had my little trusty air purifier. Um, and what was very interesting to me was that every person in that room also had access needs, right? Because I was kind of focused on the COVID safety as an access need. Um, but I was not the only person in the room who had needs. And some people needed the lights to not flash, right? No bright lights. Some people needed to see people's mouths to read lips. And that was a rare occurrence for me. I am very used to being the only person in the room with access needs. Um, and so suddenly that was just normal. That was just kind of what was happening. Everyone had that. And there was this real feeling of safety, of camaraderie, of community. Um, because I wasn't the weird one anymore. I always feel just a little bit off. And I wear these glasses because of the lights, and I have really bad light sensitivity. So I look a little odd sometimes. And I'm very used to being the one person that's like, hey, I need something, right? I need this, I need that. Very few other people are expressing their needs, their access needs. But being on this production with Lachi, um, really crystallized for me that disability culture is a way of life, is a way of interacting with people where access needs are like everything else. I have a name, I have an identity, I have a role, I have access needs. And that's exactly the same for you. And it was the same for every single person on that set. I was not the only person anymore with access needs. And feeling that just be normalized, that just being part of the process, revolutionary for me, frankly. So, disability culture for me is that feeling of community. This is not something that makes us different. It's something that makes us alike.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting because the access need is something that either is not frequently talked about or treated as an exception or something that is like, no, you're the only one who has an access need. Everybody has an access need, even non-disabled folks, right? They have
Yes.
access needs because they need a desk that sometimes surelevates because they have back issues, or they frequently travel, so they have these always carrying all these suitcases and needing something that is easy to roll. It's an access need.
It's that idea that everyone has access needs, and one thing that we can do is make that normal. I mean, that just blows the door open for, um, I mean, not just disabled people, but single parents, people that work multiple jobs, people that are caregivers to their family members, everyone that has access needs who doesn't have a space to say them, to ask for them. Um, that door is can be kicked open for them as well. And I think that's pretty cool.
Do you have this conversation with your students sometimes about, you know, access needs or different way of playing that are might be different that the traditional way they are learning, things like that?
I When I started teaching, I had no real goals. I had no real plans. I'm going to be completely honest with you, when I started, I wanted extra money because you got to make money as a working musician. Um, but when I started doing my training, I realized that a lot of the things I was being taught to do were, I didn't use this language then, but I can use it now. They were not accessible. They were for one type of student. And if that student had, I mean, performance anxiety, if that student had emotional regulation issues, if that student um, was not a cookie cutter, right? Um, I would fail them as a teacher, but they would fail, right? I would be the true failure, but they would be the one who were labeled. The failure would be placed on them, and the blame would be placed on them um, for not being capable. Um, and I remember in my very first training, I brought something like this up because it shocked me. It really bothered me that I knew people who would not respond to this kind of teaching. And I said, well, hey, what do we do when we have a student who says this or needs this or asks this? Um, they didn't have an answer. They just really didn't. So my real impetus for actually going and getting training, going back to grad school for music education, was because I noticed um, the way that we teach children, especially when they get to be young adults and they go to college, can be very damaging. I knew people in college with real problems that came from their teachers not meeting their needs. And I think that if you are a freshman in conservatory and you walk into that studio with a great master, you're not going to advocate for yourself. I just don't, the power dynamic is too strong there. Um, and so it gets very, very easy to put all these things on yourself, to say, I am the one who is failing, I am the one who is not good enough. Um, when really, there are things that the community can do. There are things that your teachers can do. There are things that the administrators can do. There are things that the institutions can do. And so when I was a teacher and I started kind of observing this and looking at this, I wish I knew the term access needs. I wish I had that kind of direct language, um, because that made me really mad. Did not like that.
Did this realization impact your music, your performance practices, or your the way you were seeing your music?
It definitely, it definitely made me a little bit more clear-headed. It kind of clarified things for me in terms of what I was bringing in to the practice room. Love practicing, obsessed with practicing. I can be alone in a room and no one is allowed to talk to me for hours, like a dream scenario. And the issue that I certainly had at maybe the end of college was that I was bringing more into the practice room with me than the instrument. Um, and when I started looking into this issue, when I started teaching and started researching, um, one of my very first questions was, how do we help students? How do we help other professionals um, only bring the stuff they really need into the practice room? How do we get them to leave their teacher's voice in the hallway, that internal critic that's always seeing something wrong with what you're doing? How do you leave the pressure of auditions in the hallway when you go to practice? Some people can do that very naturally, and they are the ones that get ahead. Other people who can't do that naturally, they're the ones with substance use problems. Um, and I was kind of, for the first time, I was able to really put language to that. And I was able to say, I do not need my teacher's voice in my head. I do not need that in the practice room. I need a metronome. I need a tuner. I need, my etude books. I do not need um, an internal critic. And so having that did help sort of my approach to the instrument, which I hope makes me a better teacher. I don't know. Fingers crossed.
I want to go back briefly to what you're doing now. Is there something you're working on right now that you want to talk about?
Well, I have well, I'll say this. You can check back with me in about a year and I'll have more to say. But I've been this year planning to expand my video game channel to a broader production company. And I am starting to write original video game music. I'm starting to do actual, I mean, not actual, but arrangements that are notated, that are, I can put in PDFs and make portfolios of. Um, and I am hoping that by the end of the year, I will have a little company name to plug on your podcast next year. But that is sort of the place that I'm going, and I'm hoping, it is a difficult industry, it is a difficult economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I've loved this project so much that I am hoping that maybe you will see me in the credits of a real video game someday.
Oh, well, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Hey, we need some luck, but
Yay. That's awesome. Okay, so I have a last question to conclude this interview. And it's about people who might have influenced your career or counted or motivated you. If you think of people who you crossed paths with and you really said, "Oh, that person really helped," who would it be and why?
to be honest, I think that one of the most influential people in my path from musician to advocate or activist, or at least active musician, right? In that sense, um, was the professor I had in grad school who accused me of forging my doctor's notes. I was in a car crash in my first semester of grad school. I was in another car crash my second semester of grad school. Very bad luck. Just happens. You never know when that's going to happen to you. Um, and I needed incompletes because I couldn't use a computer. The lights were too bright. I couldn't think. I couldn't string a sentence together. It was really difficult time, a lot of neurological problems. Um, and it was April. It was the end of the semester, and I went to my professors and was like, hey, I need incompletes. It just has to happen. I can't finish the work. And I had one professor who wouldn't give me one. And if I failed that class, which I would have, because my work after the because of these car crashes was not great, and I couldn't finish the assignments, I would have failed the class, which would kick me out of the department. Um, so I had one person, one person whose doubt could have just derailed my entire career. I would have lost almost everything that I worked for to that point. Um, that one person definitely motivated me, I will say. And that person, in a sense, gave me the permission to see myself as disabled. Because I had not started doing that yet. I did not see myself that at that time. But the moment someone saw that in me and assigned that label to me and then used it for discrimination, that gave me the permission I needed to say, you know what? I do have access needs. I do need to wear these glasses. I do need all of this, administrative support so I don't forget things. Um, I suddenly had neurological problems that I'd never had before. Um, and I probably would have just shrugged and struggled along, um, without that graduate advisor telling me that, well, are you sure this is from your doctor? Because it just looks like you copied the header on a piece of paper. And now I am here. I am in Ramped. I am on this podcast. I am very proudly disabled. I am happy to be part of the community. And as much as my teachers, as my family, as my cats have supported me, um, someone pissing me off was actually a little bit more helpful than maybe I realized in that moment.
It's very interesting. It's incredible that a negativity was pushed you to become positive with everything that was happening to you.
I
Well
mean,
done.
spite is a very powerful motivation, and I would encourage anyone who has experienced something like that, use it. Use it to your advantage. Let it fuel you, because I might still be living in my parents' house. If I had let that person just sort of walk all over me, and if I had let her kick me out of the department, if I had let her take those things from me, I don't know, I probably wouldn't have all the things I have today. So let those things motivate you.
Well, thank you for all these bits of experiences and really it was very interesting to chat with you about your experience in this musical path.
Oh, thank you.
Well, good luck for your big project. We are going to follow that. There's going to be a resource page where we're going to definitely publish things. So yeah, hopefully
Great.
it will come soon. And yeah, and for every other project that you have, and maybe see you in one of the Ramp events, maybe see you around. That would be very nice.
I agree. It would be.
Okay, have a
Maybe.
great day.
Thanks, Diane. You too.
Bye, take care.